Hello, I'm Marcia Cavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, last Saturday's senatorial runoff may have established a template for future statewide elections, one that matches, as one columnist put it, having a brand versus packaging. We'll look tonight at what we learned from the elections and the challenges facing the victorious Republican Party. With all the politics and world events and holiday pressure, the one question that seems to be the most prominent locally is, what's wrong with the Saints? We will investigate. We'll also look at key local elections, the future of the Sugar Bowl at a time of change, and our Future Watch looks at expanded streetcar service. On board are tonight's Informed Sources. Errol, Laborde, producer of Informed Sources. Jeremy Alford, publisher, LaPolitics.com. Don Ostrom, our Future Watch reporter here at WYES, and Jeff Duncan, sports columnist, NOLA.com, the Times-Picayune. First off, over to Jeremy. Okay, we finally finished a Senate race, and we have a victor.
We do, and I think right about now, Democrats must feel like a chicken walking around on the hungry side of town, because it's a tough comeback from this, and a lot of that has to do with Mary Landrieu. You know, when you have your banner bearer lose by 12 points, it's tough to come back from that. But, you know, I think what's been missed is that history was not on Mary Landrieu's side. This is the first time since the 1930s that we saw a challenger take down an incumbent U.S. senator. It's the first time in more than 25 years a Republican has come from behind in the primary in a federal election to win. It's just amazing that it happened this way, and it makes you wonder if in 2008 Mary Landrieu just didn't have a little bit of luck on her side by a few other trends like what was on the ballot.
And also now we are going to have a full congressional delegation that is GOP and all male.
Right, and for the first time, really, I think we can say that Louisiana is a one-party state. And moving forward,
we need to acknowledge Cedric Richmond, though, from
right, and really,
that's true. Yeah,
the top Democrats now are New Orleans Mayor Mitch Landrieu, Congressman Cedric Richmond, and Foster Campbell in North Louisiana. And the Democrats moving forward, I think that they would probably be best served by limiting how much activity they put into the statewide races next year, unless they feel they have a surefire win or a candidate who can articulate the message and really focus, you know, on the local level, because that's where the opportunities are for Democrats. I think in the near future, the bench for Democrats will be mayors. You know, New Orleans, Baton Rouge, Alexandria, Shreveport, all Democratic mayors. There's also some opportunities probably in the legislature as well. You know, voters, I've seen polls where they're not quite sold on having a Republican majority legislature, although, you know, really that's what we're going to be looking at in the near future.
So politics, in politics, branding versus packaging is something you wrote about. What did we learn in the Senate race, and how is it going to be moving forward, you think, in the governor's race?
Right. Political branding is a tricky thing. I think candidates, you either have it or you don't. You know, sometimes branding is inherited, like with Mary Landrieu. Sometimes it grows organically, which is really the best kind. But you know, I think what we saw with Bill Cassidy, it was more packaging. You know, the Republicans didn't sell a candidate; they sold an emotion, and I think we're still, even with him being senator-elect, I think we're all still sitting here wondering exactly who he is, what his brand is, and I think moving forward, you know, those questions are going to have to be answered.
How much do you think it hurt her, though, that the Democrats lost power altogether, that her seniority no longer mattered?
Yeah, I mean, that really flipped the script after the primary in terms of her chairmanship. But it does. I mean, you know, this is the first time since Reconstruction that Louisiana will not have a Democrat in the Senate. And, you know, we're kind of starting from fresh with Bill Cassidy going in without any type of experience or seniority in the U.S. Senate.
Remember, Louisiana was the last state to have never elected, at least in modern times, a Republican to the Senate. And then quickly we went from one extreme to the other with both of them.
Right, yeah.
So in moving then forward to the governor's race and taking a look at what you call the branding versus packaging, you had some recommendations in your latest column in LaPolitics.com. Talk about that a bit.
Right. Well, in terms of branding, I think we have, all of those different branding archetypes that I described earlier. I think we can see that in the four declared candidates. State Representative John Bell Edwards comes from a long line of politicians in his family who held the office of sheriff, and he graduated from West Point. He was an airborne ranger, which means this guy actually volunteered to jump out of airplanes and attack the enemy. Scott Angel is this Cajun from Acadiana who can speak French, and he's quick with a joke. Jay Darden is Mr. Louisiana. He gives these talks on Louisiana history, and those are always a lot of fun. And then we have Vitter, who really has the only ideological driven brand in that race. So it's going to be really interesting to see that develop next year.
And so, we can barely take a breath, and really the governor's race does start. And, when are we going to see this really start in earnest? We're approaching the holiday season now, after the first of the year.
It's already started. I think it started in earnest Sunday morning after the runoff. And really, it was really going during the race as well. But, we're also going to have a really hot Attorney General's race. And Treasurer John Kennedy is telling me that he is considering running for that spot. And, that would be a big deal. John Kennedy has been around a long time. He's such a fixture in the treasurer's office, he may as well be a piece of furniture. But I could see him getting in that race. He's raised $3.5 million. He'll report that in January. Whereas Buddy Caldwell, the Attorney General, has only raised about $410,000 as of September. His re-elect numbers are somewhere in the 20s, according to some polls that I've seen. And it's interesting because he's kind of in the same position that Charlie Fody was before he was booted out of office by voters. Fody's re-elect they were in the 20s, and he had only managed to raise about $1 million going into that campaign. But former Congressman Jeff Landry's in that race too. He has announced, and he's had a couple of six-figure fundraisers already, and he'll run to the right of the field. He'll be the Tea Party favorite.
So November next year is when is the
I think it's
primary?
October. Right.
Okay, well, we'll be talking to you more about that, I'm sure, in these months ahead. Thanks a lot, Jeremy. Okay, Jeff, the Saints. What can we say? What's going on?
They're losing.
Well,
losing a lot of football games.
Sadly, yeah.
Surprisingly so. I don't think any of us thought this team would be 5-8 at this point, and this was a team with Super Bowl aspirations, not just locally but nationally. They were a trendy pick, and I think what we've seen here is not just one thing go wrong, but a confluence of things that have kind of undermined their execution and their ability on the field. And that's why I think when you see Drew Brees and Sean Payton after these games really struggling to figure out what's wrong, the first time I've ever seen them so perplexed without any answers. And I think it's because there's so many things that have kind of gone wrong. But I don't think it's a hopeless cause long term. What I think we've seen here is just maybe a little bit lowering of standards in different areas across the board. The coaches probably aren't quite as good as they were during the Super Bowl season. They've lost a lot of very good coaches to other staffs because of promotions, because of the success of the Saints operation. Drew Brees isn't quite the player he was 3 or 4 years ago. Nobody is when they get in the mid-30s in the NFL. Yeah. The offensive line's aged. They're starting to kind of show a drop-off. And the defense has really struggled in the second year under Rob Ryan. They've had a lot of younger players that they were hanging their hat on to step forward and become difference makers, and for whatever reason, they haven't. And we saw Sean Payton this week, I think, shake up that side of the ball, trying to wake up some of these younger players. For the first time, Marcia, we heard players openly questioning the leadership and professionalism. I haven't heard that in a long time out at Saints camp, and I think that's also an issue.
Jeff, could it be that the Saints have still never really recovered from the whole bounty scandal, too? Because we lost Sean Payton for a year, so that's a year that he was out of making decisions and seeing what was going on.
Well, it didn't affect him last year. I think we're 2 years removed from that. I think if there was any effect from that, Errol, it would be the loss of some draft picks. And that contributes to what I was going to bring up, and that is this is also the natural evolution of a Super Bowl winning franchise. This happens a lot throughout the league. You win a Super Bowl, you start paying players, rewarding them for the success you had. So we have a lot of players on this team that are on what we call their second contracts. They've gotten paid. Marcus Colston, Jari Evans, Jimmy Graham, obviously Drew Brees with a huge deal. Sean Payton's making $8 million a year. Everybody's gotten paid, and to do that now because of the salary cap limitations, You really have to draft well and bring along younger players, and I think that's where they've fallen short. These younger players haven't stepped forward to make the transition to the post-Drew Brees
So having
era.
won a Super Bowl could be self-defeating down the line for a few seasons.
Well, if you have to pay an elite quarterback, the Saints are one of the handful of teams, Tom Brady in New England, Aaron Rodgers in Green Bay, and Peyton Manning, where you're paying a player $20 million a year, you really have to do well in the draft to get what we call cheap labor because of the salary cap. And the Saints are paying a lot of players a lot of money. Jarris Bird's $9 million a year. Jimmy Graham, you've got to hit on these younger players in the draft, and the Saints did not have a very good draft this year. And they've also had some injuries. In their defense, they've had a lot of guys in one particular area of the team in the secondary that's been devastating. And I think Jimmy Graham, who's their key playmaker on offense, is playing hurt. And that's why we see him dropping a lot of balls. I'm not making excuses for him, but he's not the same player he was before he hurt that shoulder injury. He's told us that he can only sleep maybe 4 hours a night. I think that's affected him a lot more than he's letting on.
I mean, you said you had hope for the long term, but you mean beyond this season, or what do you see for this immediate season, the rest of this season?
Well, I mean, they're still tied for first. Don and I were talking about that. It's amazing that they're in this division that's historically bad. And so if they win up this weekend, Monday night in Chicago, and Chicago's a team that's somewhat in disarray and reeling, and then they come back home and play Atlanta, their rival. I mean, they've got a great shot to win these final 3 games, but they proved this past week they can also lose to anybody. I mean, the Carolina Panthers were 3-8-1 and had pretty much packed it in on the season. Now they've got life again because the division's so bad. So I don't know what's going to happen. I'm tired of predicting. Every time I predict them, I'm wrong.
And whoever wins the division gets a home playoff game, right?
Correct. You get a home playoff game.
Which could be crazy.
It would be maybe potentially be a potential matchup with Seattle, which would be kind of a throwback to 2010 when the Saints had to go to Seattle, and Seattle won the division at 7-9.
At least they'd have to come here and hear our noise instead of hearing their noise over there.
And this could eventually lead to maybe some kind of shakeup in the NFL playoff seeding picture. I could see this becoming an issue down the road.
It's been a crazy season across the board, hasn't it?
Yeah, this unlike Sean Payton, Drew Brees era teams, this team's been very up and down, very inconsistent. So is the whole league.
Yeah.
We're used to more consistency out of the regime that they currently have. This reminds me a lot of the Jim Haslett era, where they could beat anybody and lose to anybody.
But we need to keep the faith, right? Because we're still in it. We're still in the hunt.
There's still a lot to play for, yes.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. Okay, Dawn, Future Watch. We're going to have more streetcars on tracks.
We are, and we talk about road construction a lot on this street. Get ready, because there's more coming to a new neighborhood. The Canal streetcar expansion from Canal along Rampart all the way to Elysian Fields is going to start construction the first quarter of next year, so within months. It's a 1.6 mile route, so 3.2 miles of continuous track if you do the out and back. They've studied it for years. They finally have the funding. They've studied track routes and where to put the tracks, and ultimately figured out there's not enough space in the neutral ground, and there's too much, there are utilities in the neutral ground, and there's also architectural things of archaeological significance, actually, that would make a project more expensive and also make it take more time, which makes it more expensive too. So the tracks are going to go in the left lane of traffic both ways out along Rampart onto St. Claude. You'll share the street just like you do on North Carrollton and just like you do in several other parts, Loyola. It does not go all the way to Press yet. It does not go all the way down Elysian Fields yet. It's strictly a streetcar route that goes from Canal Street all the way down to Elysian Fields, running parallel with the river. The RTA says there are about 70,000 people in the neighborhoods this would serve. A lot of those people are in affordable housing. A lot of them work in hospitality and other related businesses in the CBD, in the warehouse district, in the French Quarter, and this gets them to work. And the study after study shows that when you have streetcars, you have other things that come with them. You have businesses, you have development. This all comes after, earlier this week, the St. Charles streetcar line was declared a National Historic Landmark. It's one of only 2 moving landmarks in the country, the other one being the trolley cars in San Francisco. So the streetcars are getting a lot of attention. It doesn't get them more money. The St. Charles project will get more money for maintenance. That doesn't divert more money to more streetcar lines. The continuing lines that they want to build are down Elysian Fields and then all the way out to Press along St. Claude, and ultimately one that maybe goes Convention Center Boulevard and ties in with the riverfront streetcar. So you could actually go all the way around from the Loyola terminal out towards the Ninth Ward, down Elysian Fields, back along the river to the convention center and around in several different ways. They all take funding. That funding isn't in place yet for any of the other lines. It's just this one. There will be 6 stops along the route at Conti, at St. Anne, at Pauger, Elysian Fields, Ursuline, and Esplanade, and it should be finished in the third quarter of 2016.
You know, when people complain about big government and big funding and the federal government, it was the federal government that's built those streetcar lines. I mean, without federal money, you wouldn't have those street lines. And the Canal Street line, a real champion of it was Bob Livingston when he was in Congress, and it wasn't even in his district. He just believed in streetcars, and so you had a conservative Republican who was championing federal funding for those streetcar lines. But there are such a great visual appeal to a neighborhood. And in addition to the transportation advantages, it really looks good for a neighborhood to have these vehicles going down the street.
But it adds to walkability too.
Yeah.
Right, and with the project comes ADA accessible ramps on the sidewalks, come historically approved lighting that is prettier than the lighting that's there now. Also, streetcar stops and an area to sit. And new landscaping too.
These will be the red cars?
These will be the red cars.
Okay, thanks a lot, Don. Sugar Bowl's gone through some changes, Jeff. Tell us about them.
Well, for the first time, the college football has a playoff system in place. There's a 14 playoff, and the Sugar Bowl is going to be one of the semifinal games in this 14 playoff. Alabama is the #1 seed in the college football rankings, is going to play Ohio State, who's coached by Urban Meyer, former University of Florida coach. He's very familiar with New Orleans and the Superdome. He's played a lot of games there. So it should be a huge revenue booster for the city. The fact that Alabama's there, Ohio State's one of the biggest traveling teams in college football. So it's going to be January 2nd again in its normal slot. It'll be nationally televised, and the winner of that game will play the other semifinal game, which is at the Rose Bowl between Oregon and I'm blanking on it. Who is it? Oregon and Florida State. Florida State, yes. And that should be.
Football, Don.
Thank you, Don. But that should be another great game. And so finally, we're getting what I think the public wants in this college football playoff. I would like to see them have more games. I would like to see them be a little more inclusive of the other conferences. For instance, like a school like Tulane really has no shot, even if they went 12-0, of getting into this top 4. I would eventually like to see them expand it to maybe 8 games. I would like to see it be 16 and become more inclusive. I think it would be a huge ratings for TV. I think we're a long way off for that because right now the major conferences in college football, the SEC, the Big Ten, Pac-10, the Big 12, and the ACC, they control college football along with ESPN and the networks. It's really kind of controlled by TV more than anything else.
And so will the Sugar Bowl at some point host the national championship
Well,
game?
that's bid on by the Greater New Orleans Sports Foundation, just like the Super Bowl and the Final Four, and we did bid on that recently a few years ago and lost out. It's going to be in Dallas, the national championship game this year. And so we will eventually try to get into that rotation, but you have to bid on it at individual years. So it takes a lot of money these days to get those big events like that.
So the teams participating in this year, Alabama and Ohio, I mean, there's big expectations for a lot of crowds, as you said, to come on down.
Should be. Alabama's so close. They travel well. But Ohio State is obviously a massive school and huge tradition. And they kind of snuck in the back door to get in this playoff. They were a little bit of a surprise team to make. They got the 4th seed. So I think they're going to bring a lot of people down here. I would not be surprised if they have as many or more people as Alabama in the Super Bowl.
I just want to acknowledge the secondary bowl, the New Orleans Bowl, which has nothing to do with the national championship. But for 4 years in a row, it's gotten ULL out of Lafayette.
Right.
And talk about traveling well. It's just coming down the road, and that's a great crowd to have for a weekend.
Oh yeah, they fill that place up.
Yeah, they're playing University of Nevada. I don't know if Nevada travels, but ULL certainly travels to New Orleans.
And they have a good time.
And they've won the bowl every time. So it's kind of like their home away from home. And their coach, Mark Hudspeth at Lafayette, is a very hot commodity in the college football coaching circles. I think he'll stay there for another year, but he's going to get a promotion soon to a bigger job.
All right, Jeff, thanks a lot. You know, we had some other elections this past weekend, too, Errol.
This may be the last election results of the year, okay? If we had the occasion, I'd like to ask Jeremy to join in with me. But there were 2 other local elections we just wanted to acknowledge. One was the Public Service Commission election, which is a huge election. and it turned out to be very close. It was a bit of a surprise that the incumbent was pushed into a runoff. And usually, once pushed into a runoff, an incumbent is in trouble. In this case, he squeaked by Eric Scrimetta. You see right there. His challenger was Forrest Bradley Wright. This became an issue of Wright accusing Scrimetta of being part of big money and big corporations and getting big industrial backing. I don't think Scrimetta ever fully denied it, but at the same time, it's not illegal. And he says, but Wright's being backed by the solar industry. And so it just went back and forth. It's a very, very complex office, and one for voters to really have a hard time understanding. And there's only one issue they care about, and that's keeping their rates low. And so you campaign for this by trying to convince voters that you're more effective at keeping rates lower than the other. And towards the end, Scrimetta had to call in Steve Scalise, who did a Cassidy-type commercials and invoked the name of Obama. So somehow Obama became a factor in this race, too.
Right, and also, when Scrimetta, trailed the total vote tally in the primary, Republicans really stood up and took notice, and they ended up folding Scrimetta into their field operations. But, boy, you want to talk about a template for future Republican races? We've said all along that in the Senate race that this was really a referendum on Barack Obama. This wasn't about Mary Landry. This wasn't about Bill Cassidy. Well, one of the ways that Scrimetta turned this around was ads and direct mail with Forrest Wright, a Republican who has no ties to the president, and by putting him in commercials with that picture of the president right next to him, and it worked. I think that's one reason that he won by that 1 point.
The one thing, Obama's going to only be around for 2 more years, though. So, so anti-Obama campaigns can only have a limited lifetime now.
Right.
And then the other race was on the North Shore. This was for district attorney. The district includes St. Tammany and Washington Parish to replace Walter Reed, who didn't run for free election. And another very close race between Warren Montgomery and Brian Traynor. Traynor had worked at the sheriff's office. Montgomery spent a lot of his career as a defense attorney. It got very, very contentious at the end, both accusing each other of the type of company that they keep. Montgomery accusing Traynor of, because he worked for the sheriff's office, being part of a political machine, and it just became a really close election. Traynor carried Washington Parish, but Montgomery had enough vote out of St. Tammany to win.
Yeah, and this was one of those races where I think it was a big surprise. Especially for the political talking class. Traynor came out, raised a lot of money early on, and on election night I was at Bill Cassidy's party, and every legislator, every attorney I spoke to said they expect Traynor to take that race. And watching the results come in, that was a big surprise. And the other DA's race was surprising too. State Representative Chris Hazel lost that seat, the Alexandria DA's race, to Philip Terrell.
So what happened? Why the surprise? It's St. Tammany I'm talking about.
In St. Tammany, I think that there was a perception that Traynor could be linked to the old regime, that he was part of a larger political system. And I think that tide turned on him fast and quick. And supposedly, I've been told, it barely even showed up in his polling.
Really?
Yeah.
So was the candidate surprised, you think, to win himself?
I think so.
So it's a new era over there. Congratulations, of course, to Mr. Montgomery. Okay, we're talking Pelicans now. Not that I can talk too much about them, because I got to admit I don't know that much about basketball, other than I do like to watch it. So, but how are our Pelicans doing?
Well, you have to know about Anthony Davis, right? Their young star.
That much I do.
21
yes.
years old, and I think the next great superstar in New Orleans sports. Maybe you could argue right now he's a bigger star nationally than Drew Brees. He's 21. He's just on the cover of Sports Illustrated. He's been featured on ESPN. He's being used on a network to promote and market the NBA. And he's 21 years old, and he's already in the top 5 players in the NBA. But he alone is not enough for the Pelicans to win. I mean, they're 10-11 right now. They are improved from a year ago, but they're in such a tough division. The Western Division of the NBA is just brutal. It's by far where the balance of power in the NBA resides. And I think attendance has been well. They've actually held their own in attendance. But as we know in New Orleans, people don't really start thinking basketball until January. The Saints kind of dominate the headlines here, but I do think there's an opportunity for the Pelicans, because the Saints are struggling, to maybe garner some more interest and attention. They're getting ready they're in the middle of a 3-game homestand coming up, and so we'll see how people turn out. The Saints play Monday night so they don't have to battle with them on the weekend. But they're struggling right now to fill out their roster around Anthony Davis. And there's a lot of pressure on the head coach, Monty Williams, and the general manager, Del Demps, to get back in the playoffs, and I'm not sure they're going to get there this year.
I think in most towns, except maybe Louisville and a few others, football dominates into January. I'm sure it's the same thing in Chicago. That's just hard. It's hard to get
certainly
attention
does in the dual markets. What the NBA's found a lot of success in single team markets like Oklahoma City, San Antonio, where they're the only game in town, and they're able to kind of become the dominant attraction for the consumer. In New Orleans, it's never going to be the case, I don't think, even with a star like Davis.
Do you think Tom Benson's pleased with his investment, or is he saying...
Oh, I think he definitely is, because just being in the NBA right now, we just saw Steve Ballmer spend $2 billion to buy the Los Angeles Clippers. That immediately floated the boat of the New Orleans Pelicans. So I think the return on his investment is going to be incredible down the road. I don't think he's in any position to want to, the best thing he did was buy that team and keep it here in New Orleans, because if he wouldn't have bought it, I don't think we had any other local investors. It might have been moved.
As far as the season goes, we're really kind of still in the early part of the season, right? I mean, these seasons go on forever.
Yeah,
with
we're
basketball.
a quarter of the way through,
Okay.
and they've already made 2 deals, 2 moves to bring in other players to kind of bolster the bench and the depth. They've had some injuries. They've got a long way to go, but I think they're going to be right there, nip and tuck, to make the playoffs, and certainly be surprised if they could go deep in them if they do make it.
Okay, thanks a lot, Jeff. All right, time to look ahead. Errol.
Well, Urban Institute's come up with a creative way to try to raise money for Christmas. You can adopt a penguin. They have an adopt a penguin program. You can't take the penguin home, but they will give you a certificate and a little penguin kit. And in February, there's a formal event. You don't need to buy the tuxedo. It's already built into one. So
A penguin kit. That just sounds very nice. Thanks, Errol. Jeremy.
It's tough to follow. Next week is the last 2014 issue of La Politics Weekly for our subscribers, and we're going to be looking at the Democratic Party leadership. Is it time for some change at the top, and at the leadership of the Republican Party? Where do they go from here?
Right. Okay, thanks a lot, Jeremy. Bye.
The Downtown Development District is doing all sorts of Christmas things. They did a Christmas parade last week. They have the Reindeer Run and Romp tomorrow, which is a 1-mile race for little children that starts at Spanish Plaza and goes up Canal Street.
That has to be
with
too cute.
Santa and kids and reindeer antlers.
Okay.
It's fun.
Thanks a lot, Don. Okay, Jeff.
Well, we were talking Pelicans. Sunday night, they played the Golden State Warriors down the Smoothie King Center. Golden State Warriors are not a traditionally powerhouse team. They're 19-2 right now, best record in the NBA, and it's a 5 o'clock tip-off, so it's early. So no competition with the Saints, who play Monday night. Be a great time to go out and check out 2 of the great young stars in the league, Anthony Davis and Steph Curry.
That's Sunday?
It's Sunday night.
All right. Thank you guys for being here. Thank you all for joining us. And of course, we want to see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.